My name is Rachel Brooks. I'm 33 years old. I live in a four-bedroom house in Charlotte, North Carolina with my husband Marcus, our daughter Naomi, who is 7, and our son Eli, who just turned 5 in March. From the outside, our life looks like exactly what it is: a good life, a genuinely good life. And I want you to hold on to that image for a second, because everything I'm about to tell you is going to make you understand just how hard fought that goodness was. I never planned to post anything like this, but something happened 3 months ago that I still haven't fully processed, and honestly, I think I need to say it out loud to people who don't know me, people who have no stake in it, because every single person in my real life already has opinions, and those opinions are starting to feel like noise. So, here I am. I want to start by saying this. I loved my family. I know that sounds like the kind of thing everyone says before they explain how terrible someone was to them, but I mean it in a complicated, painful, real way. I loved my mother. I loved my father. I even loved my younger sister Becca, even though she was always, always my mother's favorite, and even though she proved, in the end, exactly who she was. I loved them, and they threw me away. And then, 9 years later, they needed me back. That's the story. But let me tell you how we got there, because the beginning matters. The beginning always matters. I grew up in a small town in Western Virginia, the kind of place where everybody goes to the same church, everybody knows your grandmother's name, and everybody, and I mean everybody, looks more or less the same. My parents, Dale and Carol Hartley, were not bad people by the standards of the world they lived in. My dad coached Little League. My mom organized the church fundraisers. They paid their bills on time. They didn't scream at each other in public, but there were things. Small things. The kind you file away as a kid without fully understanding what you're filing. The way my dad would make comments when a black family bought a house in our neighborhood. Nothing violent, nothing loud. Just little exhales of displeasure. Hmm. Or, well, changing around here, said in a tone that made it clear he did not mean changing for the better. My mom was subtler. She had this ability to express prejudice in the language of politeness. I just think people are happier with their own kind. That was her phrase. She said it about a lot of things: religion, culture, education, but it always seemed to end up being about race. I thought about those things later. A lot later. When they became suddenly and devastatingly relevant, I met Marcus in my second year of college. I was at UNC Greensboro studying communications, and Marcus was pre-nursing. We ended up in the same elective, a philosophy of ethics class, which feels almost too on the nose now, and we got assigned to the same discussion group. I want to be clear about something, because I think it matters. I did not fall in love with Marcus because he was black. I fell in love with Marcus because of the specific, particular, irreplaceable person he was. He was funny in this quiet, dry way, where he'd say something so unexpectedly sharp that you'd be 3 steps ahead in the conversation before you realized you were laughing. He was thoughtful in a way that felt rare, the kind of person who actually listened when you talked, who remembered the small things, who asked follow-up questions. He was kind, not performatively kind, just kind, in the bone-deep, steady, unself-conscious way that is actually the hardest kind of kindness to pull off. We started studying together, then getting coffee, then walking around campus for hours after coffee. By the end of sophomore year, he asked me to dinner, and we both already knew what it was. I was 20 years old, and I had never felt like that before in my life. I want you to understand that before I tell you what came next. I want you to know what was at stake, what we were. I didn't tell my parents right away. That's something I've been honest with Marcus about, that there was a period of time where I don't want to say hiding him because that feels unfair to him and to us. But I wasn't rushing to introduce him. I told myself it was because things were new and I didn't want to jinx it, and that was partially true. The other part of the truth was that I already knew, somewhere in the back of my mind, that this was going to be complicated. That one quiet phrase, "people are happier with their own kind," had been sitting in a drawer in my brain for years, and I could feel it waiting. I introduced Marcus to my parents over Thanksgiving break of our junior year. We drove up together. I remember Marcus was in a nice button-down shirt, dark blue, pressed. He had brought a bottle of wine and a pie from a bakery in Greensboro. He was polite and warm, and he shook my dad's hand, and he complimented my mom's house. My mother smiled the entire time. That smile. I know that smile now. At the time, I thought it was good. I thought, she likes him. She's making an effort. This is going to be okay. After Marcus drove back to campus that Sunday, we had taken 2 cars because I was staying an extra day. My mother sat down across from me at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and said very quietly, "Rachel, he seems like a very nice young man." I said, "He is, Mom. He really is." She wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at the table for a moment. Then she said, "Is this serious?" I said, "Yes." And she nodded slowly, and then she said, "I just want you to think about what you're choosing, not just for now, for the long term, for the life you're building." I asked her what she meant. She said, "There are things you can't fully understand at 21. About what life looks like, about how certain choices affect every part of your future. I'm not saying he's not a good person. I'm sure he is. I'm just asking you to be thoughtful." I sat there for a second, and then I said, "Mom, are you talking about the fact that he's black?" And she got this look on her face, not guilty, more like pained, like I had said something embarrassing at a dinner party, and she said, "I'm talking about the world you're going to live in, Rachel. The world doesn't change just because you want it to." I didn't say anything else, but something changed in me at that kitchen table. Something got very quiet and very certain. I drove back to campus the next morning, and I called Marcus from the car and I told him what she said. He was quiet for a moment. And then he said, "Yeah, I figured something like that was coming." And I asked him if he was okay. And he said, "I'm okay. Are you okay?" That was Marcus. That's who he was. And the moment where most people would be angry or hurt or pulling away, he was asking about me. I told him I was okay. And then I cried a little. And he stayed on the phone with me for the whole 2-hour drive back. My parents didn't say anything else directly for almost a year. My dad barely said anything at all. He had this ability to communicate disapproval entirely through silence and slightly too firm handshakes. My mom was warmer on the surface, occasionally asking how Marcus was, but in the tone you use when asking about a passing phase, like asking about a diet someone's trying. My sister Becca was 20 at the time, a year younger than me. She and I had always been close in the way sisters are when they're near an age, not best friends exactly, but comfortable, familiar. I thought she was on my side. She said all the right things for a while. "He seems great, Rach." "Don't let Mom get in your head." I found out later she was telling my parents everything. Every conversation she had with me. Every update. She was feeding it all back to them like a little correspondent. I don't know why. Whether she genuinely believed she was helping or whether she was angling for something, more inheritance, more favoritism, more being the good one. But she was not on my side. She was never on my side. She was never on my side. I just didn't see it yet. And honestly, if you've ever had a sibling who played both sides and called it loyalty, you already know exactly how that feels. And you know how long it can take before you finally see it clearly. Marcus proposed to me on a Tuesday in April, which is not when you'd expect a proposal, not a weekend, not a holiday, but Marcus said he didn't want to do it when I was expecting it. He took me to this small park near our apartment, the one we walked through all the time, and it was a completely ordinary day. And he got down on one knee and said, "I have known since the philosophy ethics class that you were the person I wanted to argue with for the rest of my life." And I laughed through my whole face. And I said yes before he even finished the sentence. We called our families that night. His family, his mom Denise, his dad Jerome, his 2 brothers. They were wonderful. His mom cried. His dad said, "Son, you did good." They welcomed me completely and immediately and without reservation. I want you to hold that too. I want you to remember that there was one family in the story that behaved with love and basic human decency. My mother's response when I called her was a pause that lasted about 4 seconds longer than it should have. And then, well, we'll have to talk about this. We'll have to talk about this. Not congratulations. Not I'm happy for you. Not even that's wonderful. Let me get your father. We'll have to talk about this. The talk happened 2 weeks later, in my parents' living room. Marcus wasn't there. He had wanted to come, but I told him I needed to do this first conversation alone. I think part of me still believed I could manage it, that I could explain something to my parents in a way that would get through, that there was a version of this for they came around. My dad sat in his armchair. My mother was on the couch. Becca was also in the room, which I didn't expect. She was sitting in the corner chair with her knees pulled up, and she barely looked at me, which I now understand was guilt. My dad spoke first. He said, "Rachel, we think you need to slow this down." I said, "We're engaged, Dad. We want to get married next year." He said, "That's what we're asking you to think about, what you really want, long term." My mother said, "Sweetheart, we love you. Everything we're saying comes from love. But marriage it's not just about two people. It's about families, communities, the children you might have one day." I said, "What about the children?" And she did this thing. She looked at the carpet and she said, softly, like it was compassionate, "They won't fit anywhere. They won't know who they are." I felt something go cold in my chest. I said, "Mom, I need you to say exactly what you mean. I'm not going to sit here and decode it." My dad said, "Rachel." I said, "No. Say it. Is this about the fact that Marcus is black? Because I need you to look me in the eye and say that." My mother looked up and said, "I am telling you that the world is not going to treat this the way you want it to. I'm telling you that I did not raise you to." She stopped herself. And I said, very quietly, "To what?" She pressed her lips together, and I said, "You didn't raise me for this. Is that what you were about to say?" Silence. I stood up. I said, "I love Marcus. I am going to marry Marcus. And I'm asking all of you to be part of that or not. But I'm not going to ask you to approve it. I don't need your approval. I'm 23 years old. I'm telling you as a courtesy." My dad said, "If you do this, Rachel, don't expect us to be there." I looked at him for a long moment, and something in me, something I'd been holding very carefully, just let go. I said, "Okay," and I picked up my keys and I left. I sat in a parking lot 2 blocks from their house for about 20 minutes. I wasn't crying. I was just sitting there, very still, like a person trying to locate themselves after a sudden impact. Like when you fall and you're not sure yet what's hurt. I called Marcus. He answered on the second ring. I said, "They're not going to come." He said, "I'm sorry, Rachel." I said, "Are you?" Because I feel like in some ways this just made everything cleaner. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "We're going to be okay." And the thing is, I believed him. I fully, completely believed him. Not because I wasn't devastated. I was. But because Marcus had a way of saying things where you could feel the truth in them before you could explain why. We were going to be okay. Over the following months, I tried 3 more times to reach my parents. I sent emails. I called. I sent a handwritten letter, which felt both desperate and right at the time. My mother responded once, a brief email that said she loved me, but she needed me to understand that some choices had consequences, and she hoped I would reflect on things before they went too far. Before they went too far. We were already engaged. There was nothing to reflect on. My sister Becca called me once during this period, and what I think she believed was a kindness. She said, "Mom and Dad are really hurting, Rachel." "I think if you just gave them more time," I said. "Becca, I've been trying to give them time for 2 years. I'm not putting my life on hold because they won't evolve. She said, I just don't want to lose you as a sister. I said, then come to my wedding. She didn't. I found out from a cousin that my parents actually told extended family that I had cut them off, that I had abandoned the family over a disagreement, that they were heartbroken, that they didn't understand what happened to me. Let me say that again. They told people that I had abandoned them. They were disowning me and they were performing grief over it. That was the moment I stopped hoping for a phone call. We got married on a Saturday in October. It was at an outdoor venue outside of Greensboro. White string lights, warm weather, 47 people, most of them Marcus's family and our friends. His mom Denise cried during the ceremony and held my hand during the reception and told me I was her daughter now, which genuinely, physically undid me in the most beautiful way. My parents were not there, my sister was not there. My maid of honor was my college best friend Jenna, who had been beside me through the entire 2 years of this and who gave a speech at the reception that ended with, Rachel found her person. And anyone who wasn't smart enough to show up and celebrate that is the one who lost something tonight. She was right. I danced with Marcus until midnight, and I ate too much wedding cake, and I went home with my husband, and for the first time in 2 years, I did not feel the weight of waiting for something that was never going to come. The years that followed were the best years of my life. I want to be very clear about that. I am not someone who is going to tell you it was all hard and broken because of what my family did. We built something real. Marcus finished his nursing degree, did his graduate certification, and became a cardiac care nurse at one of the biggest hospitals in Charlotte. Good at his job in that way that makes coworkers ask for him by name. I transitioned into freelance content work and eventually built a small communications consulting business from home, which let me have flexibility with the kids. We bought our house when Naomi was 2. We had Eli. We went on vacation every summer. We had a good marriage. Not perfect, nobody's is, but good in the ways that matter. Honest. Warm. Present. I thought about my parents sometimes. The way you think about an old injury that's healed but left a scar. Not constantly. Not painfully. Just present. My mom sent a card when Naomi was born. No return address, no phone number. Just a store-bought card with a handwritten note that said, "Congratulations on the new baby. I hope she's healthy." Mom. I showed it to Marcus. He said it was up to me what to do with it. I put it in a box in the closet. She sent a card when Eli was born too. Same thing. No address. Like she was communicating through a slot in the wall. I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say, and I had learned not to reopen doors without knowing what was on the other side. Years passed. My life got fuller, richer, louder, with 2 children underfoot. I stopped thinking about Western Virginia very much. Stopped checking in with cousins on Facebook. Stopped following threads of old family updates. I was too busy living forward. And then, about 3 months ago, on a Wednesday morning in early March, while Marcus was at work and both kids were at school, someone knocked on my front door. I was not expecting anyone. I had been at my kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of coffee, working on a client proposal. I assumed it was a delivery. I pulled open the door in sweatpants with my hair in a messy bun and reading glasses still on my face. And it was my mother, Carol Hartley, 61 years old. Standing on my front porch with a rolling suitcase beside her and the smaller overnight bag over one shoulder. She looked older. Of course she did. It had been 9 years. Her hair was entirely gray now, cut short. She lost weight. She was wearing a winter coat I didn't recognize. And she had dark circles under her eyes that she hadn't quite managed to cover with whatever concealer she was using. I just stood there. My first thought, I want to be completely honest with you, was not anger. It was shock. That pure, blank white kind where your brain just stops loading for a second. And then, underneath that, the smallest, most embarrassing flicker of something. Recognition, maybe, or relief, the kind your nervous system produces completely without your permission before your brain catches up and reminds you of everything. She said, "Rachel, I said, "Mom." And then neither of us said anything for about 5 full seconds. Then she said, I know I should have called first. I just I wasn't sure. I said, "How did you get our address?" She said, "Jenna." She told me. I think she felt bad for me. I don't know. I made a mental note to have a full and very honest conversation with Jenna about that. I said, "What's going on? Is someone sick? Is it Dad?" And her face just crumpled. Not dramatically, more like something that had been held up a long time just ran out of whatever was holding it. She put a hand over her mouth, and she nodded. I opened the door and let her in. I want you to understand what that felt like, letting her in. I'm a grown woman. I have a life, a family, a home that Marcus and I built together with our work, our savings, our choices, and I stood in my own doorway and let in the woman who told me that my children wouldn't know who they were, who didn't come to my wedding, who told the whole family that I was the one who walked away. I let her in because she was my mother and she was crying, and because no matter what happened between us, I did not have it in me to close a door on a 61-year-old woman with a suitcase who was clearly in crisis. But I kept my guard up. I want you to know that. I kept it fully up. I made her sit at the kitchen table. I did not make her coffee. I sat across from her and I said, "Tell me everything." And she told me. My father had a significant stroke 14 months ago. He was 64, and the stroke left him with mobility issues on his left side and some cognitive changes that were still apparently evolving. He was not in a care facility. They'd been trying to manage at home with my mother as his primary caregiver. I registered the pain of that. It was real pain. Whatever my father had done and not done, he was a human being who was suffering, and I let myself feel that for a moment before I kept listening. The bigger issue, the one that had put my mother on a bus to Charlotte with a suitcase, was money. Here's what she told me. When my dad had the stroke, my parents' financial situation was revealed to be significantly worse than anyone knew. The retirement savings my dad had been managing were largely gone. Some combination of bad investments and, my mother suspected but couldn't prove, a period of financial decisions that the cognitive issues may have started earlier than anyone realized. The house in Virginia was mortgaged more deeply than it appeared. They had some savings. Not much. And Becca, my sister Becca, the golden child, the chosen one, the one they had poured everything into and stood beside while they cut me off, had borrowed $40,000 from my parents over the preceding 3 years. Money for a business she was starting, money for a down payment on a house, money for what my mother described vaguely as things that didn't work out. And when my father had a stroke and my mother sat down to go through everything, she found that Becca had also been named on a secondary account. My parents kept for family emergencies, and that account had been quietly, gradually drained. Becca had, apparently, taken approximately $31,000 from that account over 18 months. And then, when the stroke happened and things got serious, Becca had become very hard to reach. She'd moved to another state. My mom wasn't sure exactly where. She wasn't returning calls. She'd sent a Christmas card in December with no return address. My mother, sitting at my kitchen table 9 years after telling me that my husband wouldn't fit into the world, was now telling me that the daughter she had chosen had robbed her and disappeared. I sat with that for a moment. I kept my face as calm as I could. And then came the part I still can't fully believe, even though I was sitting there when it happened. My mother reached into her bag and pulled out a small folder. She set it on the table between us. She said, "I've been looking at your life, Rachel. You've done well. You and—" She paused just slightly and then said, "You and Marcus. I can see that." I said nothing. She said, "I need help. I need financial help, and I was wondering if there was room here. If you had space for me while things get sorted out." I looked at the folder, then at her. I said, "You want to stay here?" She said, "Just for a little while, until I figure out the situation with the house." There's a buyer who's interested, but the timeline is uncertain, and your father needs. I said, Where is Dad? She said he was staying with a neighbor in Virginia temporarily, a woman from their church who had offered. The plan, as she explained it, was for her to get settled somewhere first and then figure out arrangements for him. I said, And your plan was to get settled here. She said, I know I don't have the right to ask. I know that. But you're my daughter. And there it was. You're my daughter. 9 years ago, that fact was apparently not relevant. When I chose the person I loved and built a life worth living, when I made her a grandmother to two children she has not met, I was not her daughter enough for her to show up to a 47-person wedding. I was not her daughter enough for her to return a phone call or write a letter with a return address. But now, with a suitcase on my porch and $40,000 missing and a mortgaged house and a faithless younger daughter she'd spent 2 decades preferring, now I was her daughter. I want to say here, if you've ever been the one in your family that they came back to when things fell apart, comment below, because I think we are a larger club than we realize, and I think we deserve to say it out loud. I excused myself from the table and went to the bathroom for 5 minutes. Not because I needed to cry, though I felt close to it, but because I needed to think without her watching my face. I sat on the edge of the bathtub and I looked at the tile floor and I thought about what I was going to do. I thought about Naomi and Eli, about Marcus coming home from a 12-hour shift to find his mother-in-law, a woman who had never once acknowledged his existence with dignity, sitting in our kitchen, about what that would mean for our home, our peace, our children's sense of who they were and who our family was. I thought about the last 9 years, the silence, the Christmas cards with no return addresses, the cousins who repeated the story that I had abandoned them, the wedding my parents didn't attend, the graduation they didn't attend, the baptism, Eli's baptism, that they didn't attend, where Marcus's mother Denise stood in the front row of that small church and was more present and more family than anyone named Hartley had ever been. I thought about a lot of things in those 5 minutes, and then I went back to the kitchen. I sat down. I said, Mom, I'm going to say some things. I need you to let me finish before you respond. She nodded. She looked scared. I said, 9 years ago, you told me that the man I loved, the man who is currently the father of your grandchildren, and one of the best people I have ever known in my entire life, was not right for me because of the color of his skin. You said our children wouldn't know who they were. You chose not to come to my wedding. You didn't call when I was in labor. You didn't meet Naomi when she was born. Or Eli. You sent greeting cards with no address, which I think was your way of keeping a line open without actually being accountable to anything. She opened her mouth. I said, I'm not done. She closed it. I said, You have a daughter who you chose, consistently and clearly over me for our entire lives, who you funded and protected and supported, and who, as far as I can tell, took that money and left when things got hard. I'm not going to pretend I'm not human. Some part of me feels something about that, and I'm not proud that part exists, but it does, but that's not the point. I took a breath. I said, The point is this. You did not show up for me. You did not show up for Marcus. You did not show up for my children, who are your grandchildren, and who are beautiful and funny and brilliant and have no idea you exist. You didn't do those things because of racism. That's the word. Not how the world works. Not choices having consequences. Racism. And I need you to know that I know exactly what it was. My mother had tears running down her face. She wasn't sobbing, just a silent, streaming kind of crying. I said, Now I'm going to tell you what I can and can't do. I told her she could not stay in our house. I told her that clearly and without negotiation. The reason was not cruelty and it was not revenge. It was that Marcus and I shared this home, and I would not make a unilateral decision to move the woman who had treated him as invisible into our space. That was not a choice I had the right to make alone, and even if I did, it wasn't one I would make. Our children live here. Our peace lives here. I told her I would not pretend the last 9 years hadn't happened in order to make her more comfortable. I told her that if there was going to be any kind of relationship going forward, any kind at all, it was going to require her to be honest, to say directly the thing she had never said, to acknowledge what she had done and why and what it cost us. I told her I wasn't asking for a speech. I wasn't asking for theater. I was asking for honesty, which is the thing she'd withheld from our entire family for decades. And then I told her what I could do. I could help her find resources for my father's care. I had been doing some research in those 5 minutes in the bathroom, because I am nothing if not a practical person. And there are programs, there are options, there are paths that don't involve her depending on a daughter she disowned. I told her I would make calls. I told her I would help her navigate it. I also told her, and this one I thought about carefully, that I was willing to have a real conversation. One time. One conversation where she said the true thing and I listened, and then we would see. She looked at me for a long time. Her hands were flat on the table. Then she said, very quietly, I was wrong about Marcus. I waited. She said, I was wrong about everything, about what I said, about not coming to your wedding, about the children. Her voice broke on that one. About letting years go by. I was wrong and I was afraid, which is not an excuse. I know it's not, but it's what it was. And I told myself stories about why it was the right thing, and none of those stories were true. I didn't speak. She said, I don't expect you to forgive me. I just need you to know that I know. I know what I did. I called Marcus at his break that afternoon. I told him everything. He was quiet for a long time. And then he said, How are you doing? Which is, again, who Marcus is. His mother-in-law, who refused to acknowledge his existence for 9 years, showed up on our doorstep, and his first question was about me. I told him I didn't know how I was doing. I told him what she had said, the apology, and I told him what I had told her about the house, and what I was offering to help with. I told him I needed him to tell me honestly what he thought. He was quiet for a moment. And then he said, I think you handled it exactly right, and I think if she's really saying it and she means it, then we figure out what that looks like. Slowly, on our terms. But I'm not going to be the reason you lose your mother, Rachel. I started crying then, the kind I'd been holding back all day. I said, You're not the reason I lost her. She made choices. I made choices. You're just the thing that made the truth visible. He said, Okay, I'll be home by 7. We'll talk. He came home and the kids were fed and in pajamas, and my mother had left. I'd called her a car to a hotel nearby, and I'd pay for 2 nights because I am apparently incapable of not doing the kind thing even when the kind thing is complicated. And Marcus sat down and we talked for 2 hours. We decided together. That's what I want you to know. We decided together. In the weeks that followed, here's what happened. I helped my mother find a transitional arrangement for my father, a rehab and assisted living facility 2 counties over from where they've been living that accepts Medicaid supplemented care. It took 8 phone calls and 3 days of paperwork, and it is not a perfect solution, but it is a real one. My father is there now. He's being looked after. My mother is renting a small apartment 30 minutes from Charlotte. She found a part-time job at a garden center. She's always loved plants. That part of her was always real. She's close enough that if we decide to let her into our lives more fully, that's possible. She's far enough that our home is still ours. I introduced her to Naomi and Eli on a Sunday afternoon in a park. I told the kids she was my mom, their grandmother, and that she lived nearby now. Naomi, who is 7 and has no patience for things that are weird, immediately asked why she hadn't met her before. I said something honest and age-appropriate. We had some disagreements when I was younger, but we're working on it. My mother knelt down in the grass to Naomi's level, and she said, I am very glad to meet you. And Naomi studied her for a second and then said, Your hair is gray. My other grandma's hair is brown, but she says it's actually red underneath. My mother laughed, a real laugh, the kind I remembered from before everything. I watched Marcus watching this from the other side of the picnic blanket. He had one hand wrapped around a water bottle and he was watching my mother with our daughter with an expression I couldn't fully name. Not warm, not cold. Careful. Patient. Honest. I think that's the right word for Marcus. Honest. I think that's the right word for Marcus. Honest. In everything. After the park, when the kids were in the back seat and my mother had said goodbye and we were driving home, I said to Marcus, "How was that for you?" He said, "Hard." "And okay?" I said, "That's about where I am too." He reached over and took my hand. I haven't heard from Becca. I have no idea where she is or what she's thinking. My mother doesn't push it. I don't ask. There's a door there, and right now it is closed, and I do not know if I will ever open it. What she did to my parents was wrong. What she did to me, all those years of reporting back and pretending to be on my side, was a different kind of wrong. I don't have the emotional energy to address both at once, and honestly, I'm not sure I owe her that energy at all. Maybe someday. Not now. My dad, we haven't spoken. He's in care and his cognition is affected, and I don't know what a phone call would look like or accomplish right now. I've asked my mother to tell him that I know where he is and that I hope he's okay. That felt like the honest version of what I actually felt. Not warmth, exactly. Not forgiveness, because I haven't arrived there. Just, I know you exist and I hope your suffering is manageable. Is that enough? I don't know. I don't have a clean answer to that. I want to say one more thing before I finish. I've seen the kind of story this gets turned into in media, in conversations, in the ways people talk about things like this. I've seen it become a story about redemption and forgiveness and the triumph of love. And I don't want to do that to it because it's not clean like that. It's not a movie. My mother is not a different person. She is the same person who said those things, who made those choices, who spent 9 years performing injury while causing it. She is also a 61-year-old woman who lost her husband to a stroke and her younger daughter to her own worst behavior, and who got on a bus and showed up at a door she had no right to knock on. Both of those things are true simultaneously. I don't have a triumphant ending for you. I have this. A Sunday afternoon in a park, my daughter asking about gray hair, my husband holding a water bottle with careful eyes, and me standing somewhere in the middle of it all, trying to be a person who is honest about what things cost and what they're worth. What my family cost me, the years, the grief, the having to build everything from scratch without them, that's real. It's real and it mattered. And I am not going to pretend otherwise in the name of a tidy narrative. What Marcus and I built is also real. More real, honestly, than anything I grew up around. A home where our children know who they are without question. Where they have a father who models what it looks like to be kind and strong and present. Where they have a grandmother in Denise who has loved them since before they were born. I did not lose something when my family disowned me. I lost the illusion of something, and that is a different, much smaller thing. I hope my mother and I build something real. Slowly. On our terms. I hope that if you're in a version of this story, if you have people in your life who made you feel like your love was the problem, I hope you know that the love was never the problem. The love was the only thing that was right. And if you're the person who closed the door and is now standing outside wondering if it will open, I hope you understand what it costs to ask. I hope you understand that showing up with a suitcase is not the same as showing up. I hope you find the courage to say the true thing, plainly, without excuses, and then live with whatever comes next. My name is Rachel Brooks. I am 33 years old. I have a husband who asked me if I was okay on a 2-hour phone call, a daughter who asks about gray hair, a son who just turned 5, and a life that I am, despite everything because of everything, genuinely proud of. That's my story. If this resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop a comment below. I'd really love to know. If you were in my position, would you have opened that door? I'll see you in the next one.